G'day. Welcome to episode number 14 of the Cold-Blooded Contributions podcast. The Cold-Blooded Contributions podcast is proudly sponsored by Midwest Tongs. For over 40 years, Midwest Tongs team has been providing the highest quality snake handling tools made in the USA, made by professionals for professionals. We're your hosts, the Ipers. I'm Scott Iper. With me is my wife, Ty Iper. This podcast will bring to you people in the hobby who have made an impact on us creatively, be it artistically with data, improving husbandry, and all of the above. Today, we're stoked to have Adam Elliott with us. G'day, Adam. How are you, mate?
Good, guys. How you guys going?
Good, thanks, Hans. Thank you so much for doing this.
No, you're welcome. You know, anything for you guys. Some of the people probably listening, we've been friends for a long time. I suppose I should start off by telling you guys a little bit about myself.
Please.
So, my name's Adam Elliott. Been a private keeper for pretty much as long as I remember. Started off catching blue tongues and frogs and things around paddocks and backyards of western suburbs of Melbourne when I was a kid. And that just progressed into a lifelong passion of herps in general. A little bit like yourself, Scott.
Yeah, mate. Well, we've known each other since I was a pretty young teenager, I reckon.
Mate, I don't even think you had your licence when I first met you.
Driver's licence? Nah, I didn't have my driver's licence. I was still riding around on a pushy.
I actually remember doing a herping trip with you to, I reckon it was Eden on the far south coast of New South Wales. You doing a bit of driving.
For me, Els.
While I was with your Els, exactly.
Yeah, oh, Jesus.
Night
That's
driving
going back.
for diamond pythons with your Els.
that was in the old XD Falcon, I think, from memory, wasn't it?
Oh, I think it was XD, XB, something like that back in the day, yeah.
Back when fuel was about 35 cents a litre.
Yeah, now we all drive nice fancy four-wheel drives. Some of us do.
Some of us do. Yeah, I've got a little white runabout. I don't get the four-wheel drive anymore.
What do you drive, Ty?
A brand new Jimny. 5-door Jimny.
You drive a nice fancy four-wheel drive.
What do you drive, Adam?
I've got a Isuzu D-Max these days.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah.
And I have a Hyundai Venue.
Nice.
Yeah.
But I don't think people are here to listen to us talk about cars, really, are they?
No, but we can bring it back to herping a little bit. The one thing about a little two-wheel drive, as you well know, mate, is you can spin around on a dime. Makes it easy when you're doing a Yui on the road when you've seen something, I suppose. Bit easier than a 4B.
Oh, I remember back in the day, even when I had a big car, I would often borrow my wife. Well, she wasn't my wife at that stage, but wife's car, because it was a tiny little Barina that, as you said, you could just, spin on a dime.
I remember when I was real young, I used to borrow my parents' Nissan Prairie. And the fun thing about that is you used to be able to lock the doors open in the back. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that made it easy getting out when you were chasing things.
Getting out in a hurry.
Yeah. So you didn't have to wait for the door to open. You could drive along with the doors open and locked open, and you could just bail out the side of the car. That was good fun.
No seat belts, car doors already open. The things we do when we're young and stupid.
This was like last week, wasn't it?
Well, not quite. Not quite. I don't know what the statute of limitations of traffic offences is.
We're about to find out.
Well, we can find out. That's not the first time we've done silly things on cars. Sitting on bull bars and things like that, chasing things as well. That's always been fun.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Chasing small dragons, earless dragons, and all sorts of things. I've been sitting on the front of bull bars, driving through farmers' paddocks.
Wasn't that successful? It was more successful on foot, though, wasn't it?
Oh, it was in the end. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
But that's not the only thing we've looked for like that. I think I've been out with you driving through Little Desert, probably looking for painted dragons and all sorts of things sitting on a bull bar. They're easier to spot from the bull bar than they are from the passenger seat.
Certainly are, but the problem is, too, when you hit a bit of scrub and you happen to be the person sitting out the front, the heath that's in that little desert cuts you up pretty well.
I'll tell you a funny story, and I'm not sure whether you may have heard this story yourself, Scott. I definitely wouldn't have. But many years ago, a mutual friend of both of ours, John, when we did a trip up to Darwin. And as I said, this is when you're young and dumb. Yeah. We were going out to Mary River boat ramp sort of almost every night, herping along the road, because there was this little tiny saltwater crocodile hatchling that was sitting on the edge of the boat ramp. Now, at Mary River boat ramp, it's actually a really steep decline to the water, and you've got to come over a hump. And so you can't see the edge of the water until you get over this hump. And we tried to get it for this little croc. We just wanted to photograph the little guy, but we tried to get him for, every night for about a week. And every night he was sitting in the same spot. And so I had this wonderful idea that I'd sit on the bull bar of the Land Cruiser while John flew up over this hump, and then he just hit the brakes at the end, and I'd just jump straight off onto this little crocodile.
Yeah.
So we come roaring in over this hump. It was actually a king tide that night. And so instead of the water still being another 20 metres down, all of a sudden we crest this hump, and there's just this water in front of me. And I'm screaming for John to stop, holding onto the windscreen wipers because the little crocodile is nowhere to be seen. There's about a 4 metre saltwater crocodile up to the edge of the boat ramp. So how I didn't break his windscreen wipers, I was holding on for dear life, I tell you.
I was going to say it's the bugs in your face that I'm not fond of, but that takes it to a whole new level.
I reckon.
All I could picture was just getting launched straight off the front of the car. Thankfully, the brakes worked.
Yeah.
The windscreen wipers held. They didn't break. And I managed to stay on the front of the car.
Oh, the good old days, eh?
That would have been a few years ago now, mate.
Oh, geez, I would have been probably my early 20s then, I would have said. Many years ago. What am I, 48 now? So, just a few years ago.
A few years ago, that's all right. As you get older, it becomes more relative, I reckon, how long ago things are. I don't think it was that long ago that I moved to Queensland, and then I looked it up the other day. And
trust me, it was a while ago.
It's almost 20 years now.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Bloody hell.
So,
anyway, it flies.
It does, and once you have kids, it just seems to go even quicker that time.
That's it. So have you kept throughout your whole life?
I've kept pretty, I would say, constantly since I was about 10 years old.
Yeah.
Some of that time was unbeknown to my parents. I remember one of my earliest memories of keeping I remember keeping animals before this, was that my mum and my stepdad, can't remember that specific at the time. They found an enclosure of venomous snakes out in the backyard when I was about 10 years old. I was staying with my grandparents at the time and got a very, very angry phone call.
We've all had that phone call, mate.
Yeah, I'd always been told lizards were fine, but no snakes. After that, I think my mum pretty much just gave up on me and just said, do what you want, just be careful. I'm sure you probably got a similar talk.
I was going to say, mate, that sounds so familiar. I reckon that exact phrase, it could be any lizard you like, but no snakes. And that lasted all of nothing.
Well, when I moved to the western suburbs, I originally grew up in Footscray as a young kid. When we were 10, we moved out to Werribee, in the western suburbs of Melbourne. And back then, those days, Werribee was nothing but paddocks where I lived. And so me and my brothers, we would just spend the days, if we weren't at school, we were off out in the paddocks catching lizards and snakes. And so I think she pretty much figured out pretty quickly that she wasn't going to stop us doing it.
I think like me, mate, you'd take the odd day off school when it was particularly nice weather for herping.
Definitely wagged school many days.
The amount of days I took off because it was good herping weather. That was definitely the case.
How do you think the hobby's changed from early days, from when you started keeping ads to now?
The biggest change that I would have said these days is just how easy it is to access information. The hobby itself hasn't really changed. Keeping reptiles, to be honest, hasn't really changed. I've spoken to this about a lot of people. You look at it, we are still keeping snakes and lizards in boxes, heating them with a light globe.
Yeah.
If you really want to just break it down to simple, we're still doing that. Now, we've got a few, I suppose, fancier technologies, better thermostats, probably better lighting and whatnot. But at the end of the day, we're keeping animals in boxes with a light globe. So that side of things hasn't changed all that much. But that access to information these days is it's just so easy.
Phenomenal.
I think one of the big differences, though, while we are just keeping animals in boxes with light globes, we're not getting the light bulb out of something else or the thermostat out of something else and rewiring it to make it work for reptiles. We can buy a purpose-built item, whether it be a light fixture or a thermostat that's specifically designed for use within the pet industry. And that's it.
Itself, it has improved We have better types of lighting, better thermostats. The thermostats we were using back in those days were all made for ducted heating systems and things.
Yeah.
Now you get specific reptile thermostats. So that side still hasn't changed all that much for me. We still knew even back in those days when we were kids that we wanted a thermal gradient. I suppose UV was starting to come into it. It wasn't that well known. We were using UV lights. We were using the good old NEC black light. that was all we had back in those days.
And the BioLux.
Oh, yeah.
The BioLux tubes, the pink ones.
So we're still running the same sort of things, just with better equipment to do it.
Yeah, 100%.
But that access to knowledge, though, the way that has changed the internet, the way the internet changed that is just amazing. I mean, you'd know yourself, everything that we learned, including you when I say we had to learn ourselves.
Yeah.
We did have the influence of a few people like Brian Barnett as such, but for the most part, we had to learn it ourselves. Or you would have to go to the library and try to find whatever reptile books you could and read up as much as you could. These days, you just type any question into Google.
Yeah.
And you get an answer. One of the big changes, I suppose, for me is that it's just so easy to get that information. Now, people these days, a lot of the young guys, they do not realise that it's keepers, and I'm not going to say me because there was more pioneers even before us, me or you, like Brian Barnett. They had to make so many mistakes. And I'll be brutally honest, I had to make so many mistakes to work out how to keep things correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, you can just Google that in 1 second how to keep anything and how to keep it well.
Right. Even then, trying to get that information, it's not like you can pick up the phone, or you might be able to pick up the phone, but then chances are people aren't sitting by their phone waiting for a phone call to come in. You're using landlines for the most part because people didn't have mobile phones basically back then.
So it was ring your own state.
So it was ring your own state, otherwise you get in trouble for an STD phone call. You would write letters potentially to get information, and then people had to physically handwrite a letter back to you. Some of that stuff was really, really tough.
Well, I'll talk about something that a lot of people don't bring up these days, probably partly because some of it is, I suppose, a little bit of embarrassment on our behalf, and that is we had, and I will include you in this because I've known you long enough.
Yeah.
When we were younger, we had a lot of animals die.
Of course we did.
And that was because we didn't have access to that information and we had to learn everything ourselves.
Yeah. Back then, mate, when we started, there was 2 reptile vets basically in Southern Australia.
Yep.
And then to find a reptile vet that would then treat venomous, you're pushing shit uphill to try and get those things happening, to try and figure out how to get something eating and things like that. It was so difficult. I remember getting my first set of snake probes that were actual snake probes instead of a piece of wire that you'd filed clean, or a piece of monofilament fishing line that you'd hit with a lighter on the end of it to make it actually work.
We still didn't have anyone to show us how to probe a snake. We knew the sort of basic concept from reading it from a book, and then we had to figure out how to do it ourselves.
Give it a crack.
Give it a crack.
And try not to damage the snake.
Yep. Now, thankfully, and this is one of the massive benefits to the hobby now, is that people don't have to make all those mistakes that we did.
And I think now, too, a lot more people are, well, I'd like to say a lot more people are interested in learning, too. It's not, I've got it, I'll learn along the way, which seemed to be a huge thing 10, 15 years ago. Now they're actually wanting to learn more.
I think people being honest about their mistakes is good too. You know, I remember seeing a guy talk about keeping desert skinks in Alice Springs, and he kept them in a pit. And the problem is that he killed all of them in the first year because the first winter that they came, they dug to the edge of the corrugated iron.
Yeah.
Right. So they dug in the sand to the edge of the corrugated iron, and that was what it was exposed to the weather.
Yeah.
So instead of the lizards being underground and usually being able to overwinter without an issue,
nice insulation.
They dug to the side, and the next thing you know, they're exposed to the cold. Now, it was an easy fix the next year. The guy put bales of hay around the outside. Now, I don't know about you, but certainly me, things like that, learning from other people's mistakes means that you don't make those mistakes moving forward. But changing hay in pits and making sure that it's always warm and dry, or cool and dry, making sure that it doesn't get too warm in summer, doesn't get too cold in winter. None of that stuff was really written about. And so learning how to keep stuff outside without causing issues, and then trying to find ways to treat parasites outside.
As I say, simple things like mites. So many people don't treat them because they didn't have the knowledge. Oh,
Yeah.
it'll go away.
Or you'd use something like Neguvon or a Shelltox pest strip and
Shelltox.
have a bloody headache when you walk into the snake room, you know?
But a lot of those advances that we've made, they sound so simple now. Like you say about putting a bale of hay in, and they're such simple fixes. But at the time, we were doing everything off the top of our heads. We had no idea, and we were learning as we went. And a lot of the young guys these days, they don't realise, I'm going to say sacrifice, that a lot of the pioneers made.
Yeah.
Also a limited income on what you could do to try and better the situation without that information.
Yeah.
You had to bloody MacGyver everything too. Like the amount of things that you'd figure a way of making work because you can't purpose buy that thing that you can now. So you'd be pulling things apart. And I suppose in some ways it made you a more lateral thinking keeper. And I think it makes you go, all right, well, I'll try this, I'll try that. And the one thing that you learn is that you try little things and take little steps each time, as opposed to throwing the baby out with the bathwater and restarting right from the start.
No, look, I think we were lucky ourselves. So I count people in Australian herpetoculture like Brian Barnett, Greg Parkers. I call them pioneers. We grew up in an age where we've actually had the best of both worlds. So we've got to know all those old timers and learn their ways, and we've been able to continue on learning the new ways, which for me, that's amazing. I find that amazing. We've had the best of both worlds. A lot of these new guys, they wouldn't understand a lot of these old techniques. Learning the basic way helps your brain, I suppose, adapt, and you understand the more complicated versions better because we've understood the basics as well.
I think too, you can apply that same knowledge base to a lot of things, whether it be taking photos or even doing demonstrations. I remember you coming back telling me about your time doing demos at the Darwin show.
With Graham Gow.
With Gow, yeah. He taught you a different way of doing demos to what we were doing down south, that's for sure.
He was a unique person himself. He was just, I don't even know how to explain Graham. Like, I love Graham. An amazing, amazing handler. He taught me techniques that I would never have even imagined to handling snakes, which taught me to be a lot better handler, to be honest. And it's techniques that I can't even explain verbally. You have to see them to learn them.
Yeah.
But again, that was that great experience of getting to spend time growing up with some of these old timers. And I say old timer very affectionately.
Yeah, 100%.
You're about to be one quite soon, aren't you?
Look, I would say we're pretty close now. I look at most of the young herpers coming through, and I'm definitely have to be their dad. Fortunately, I've been spending a lot of time with some of these younger fellas lately, and that's one of the things that they mention to me quite often is how much they actually learn from me. And I love that, because it's no good just having all this information up in our heads. It's great to have that opportunity to be able to pass it on where it's useful in the future.
Yeah, definitely.
And you doing demonstrations and training courses, you'd find exactly the same thing, no doubt.
Yeah, I think that, but I think also too, in all of our cases, the writing as well has enabled us to really articulate a lot of the things that we used to do, as well as showing more practical techniques. We've been able to share the theoretical side of things as well. I enjoy that too.
I've been fortunate in my career to work in places like Melbourne Museum and various zoos, and especially in the zoo roles, I've had that opportunity to pass on a lot of that knowledge to the people working under me, which is people you had on your show, Riley Morris.
Yeah.
We've had Riley and Kim on. Yeah.
Like having that experience to be able to, pass on that knowledge to the likes of Riley Morris and Ben Gray, Zane Bullocks, a few of the guys I work with. It's just amazing. As I said, other than just being up in my head and lost.
Yes, yeah.
You've worked in quite a few different places. You were saying that you worked at the museum and a couple of zoos and wildlife parks. How's the difference between those places? You've worked in those institutions for such a long time. Do you feel keeping the animals at home weren't as much fun as working with some of the other stuff that you got to play with at the zoo, or did you find them more or less to be the same?
So I found it very similar, whereas I know a lot of people who work in the animal industry tend to lose that passion for keeping animals at home. I never had that issue really. And I think it's because, number one, I had a completely different array of animals at home. For example, when I was working at Melbourne Museum, their collection was largely invertebrate based. So, spiders, scorpions, mantids, all sorts of things along that lines. But learning actually how to look after those taught me a lot about reptile keeping.
Yeah.
There's a lot of sort of similar things with temperature gradients, and for the greater part for inverts and stuff is moisture gradients, which people don't think a lot about. But that can be quite important for keeping things like frogs, for example. So I always tell everybody who's keeping animals, especially reptiles, don't just learn that animal. So your passion might be reptiles, but you will learn so much more, even if you're only learning the basics on how to keep a whole range of different other things. That will just improve your reptile keeping. So when I was at places like Ballarat Wildlife Park, I would encourage someone like Riley. I said to him all the time, go and do a bit on the mammal round. There'll be things you can learn that you can transfer across to reptile keeping. Mammals was probably a bit of a bad example. Birds a bit more specific. Yeah, and especially aquatics. If you can learn aquatics, that'll teach you so much about reptiles. Aquatics is great, obviously, for turtles, but then also things like frogs. And then you've got things like file snakes, Maclay's water snakes, and crocodilians.
Yeah.
The more you know about aquatics, the better you'll keep all of those guys.
Did you find that you can take things like, obviously, enrichment and stuff like that? People are starting to do that with reptiles these days. Are you finding that sort of works better with reptiles after doing it with birds and mammals?
Look, I only have recently myself started dabbling, and that was in Ballarat Wildlife Park, dabbling in a bit of reptile enrichment. And that was specifically when I started working with Komodos. So Ballarat Wildlife Park, they have the only, now 2 Komodo Dragons in Victoria. Prior to working with Komodo Dragons, my number one reptile in the world was lace monitors. If I could only keep one animal in the whole world, it would have been lace monitors until I met Komodo Dragons. And they are just a whole nother level. They are just one of the smartest, to be honest, they are the smartest reptile I've ever worked with. They're like a lapdog. They really are. I would have one walk around my house if I could. Stupid Australian wildlife laws. There was a video posted, I said, within the last few years of a Komodo playing with a bucket on its head.
Yeah.
We actually tried to replicate this same, I suppose, experiment. The guy in the video called it play. I had a very hard time calling that play. So the Komodo would put its head in the bucket, but that was more investigation to me. They're very used to putting their heads inside things. If you give them a carcass feed, the head goes straight in. Whether I would call that play or not, I don't know. Whether Komodos or monitors play, they definitely don't play what we call play.
Yeah.
But they're interactive. And to me, for something like a Komodo dragon, that is the best enrichment you can give them, is interacting with them. Like stimulation. It doesn't have to be what we think of as fun and games. It just needs to be stimulating for that animal.
So could that be something as simple as putting some browse in an enclosure so there's some new smells, or dragging the food item around?
Yep. So for Komodos, that's actually a great one, is you would go off to one of the other enclosures and we might bring back some wombat poo or some old koala browse or anything like that that's got some of those other strange mammal smells on them.
Yeah.
And you put it in different areas of the enclosure and you just watch the Komodos go nuts, just exploring it all. You could see the tongue would be constantly flicking. They're on alert, and they'll just pace the enclosure, checking every new piece that you've put in. They'll check every bit out. It's just human interaction. Like, they are so smart, and they actually seem to really enjoy human interaction. They love scratches and belly rubs, and they'll sit on your lap like a lapdog while you just stroke their back, and they'll go to sleep.
Yeah.
They are such dog-like that it's not funny.
You've just made everyone listening that hasn't had an interaction with a Komodo extremely jealous.
We've got one question that we tend to ask. What would you like to keep if you had the opportunity, excluding a Komodo dragon?
Well, as you already know, I keep lace monitors. So there, number one, I've always loved my laces. I always will love my laces. But no, if there was something else that I could keep that we're not allowed to in Australia, it would actually be American alligators.
Yeah, okay.
And they are another one that if I could, I would have an alligator in my house.
Why is that? What's your affection?
They're not like your standard or what everyone thinks of as a salty. They're quite intelligent, but they're just so calm. Once they get to know you, they are so calm. You can sit on their back and brush their teeth and do all sorts of things, scratch them on the head. They will actually play as well, those guys. They will definitely play. You give them something like a feather, like a big bird's feather, and they'll play with that feather, and they seem to know that it's not food, because if they wanted to, they'll just eat that feather in one gulp.
Yeah.
But they'll grab that feather and they'll chew on it. They'll throw it little ways, they'll sort of flip it up in the air, and to me, that is actually more like play. But no, gators, they're just fun to work with because you can do all these things that you can't get away with an estuarine crocodile.
Is there a difference working with females versus males?
I didn't find much difference, to be honest. What I found with most gators is they will test you. So if you turn your back on a gator, they will try to sneak up on you. but as soon as you turn around and face that gator, they're like, oh, I'm busted. And they'll stop.
It's like that What's the Time, Mr. Wolf game.
Exactly like
kids,
that.
Mate.
Yes, exactly like that game. You can swim with gators. As I said, you could sit there and brush their teeth and do it really safely with, I would have said, very little chance of getting bitten. Imagine trying to do that, sit on the back of a saltwater crocodile.
Yeah, no thanks.
Stumpy.
Yeah, that's it.
But they will literally just lay there. They'll close their eyes. They're completely comfortable. They'll close their eyes and almost go into a bit of a nap and open their mouth and let you brush their teeth.
That's insane.
Yeah, they're great. So Komodo number one, if I could, and close second would be American alligator.
What do you think the biggest misconception people have about zookeepers is?
To be honest, I'll probably piss off a lot of zookeepers by answering this. That zookeepers are the pinnacle of herpetological keepers. That zookeepers are the best reptile keepers in the world.
Oh, I don't disagree with you. I do not disagree with you at all. I think the reality of it is, mate, is that the reason there's a lot of really good keepers out there that don't work in the zoo industry primarily due to the remuneration that sits within the zookeeping industry. That's one part of it. And then the bureaucracy and the politics is the other side of it.
Well, this is the thing. So I was about to expand on that because I'm not trying to say that all zookeepers are terrible, because I definitely don't mean that. There are some amazing zookeepers out there. There's plenty of average ones as well. But part of it is because of the zoo system itself. So when you work in a zoo setting, us at home, we can maintain multiple pairs of different species and aim to breed them every single year.
Yeah.
In a zoo situation, you actually don't get to do that. Breeding within zoos is really tightly managed. And for the most part, in most zoos with reptiles, not much breeding actually happens. And that's purely because all of these species that are in zoos, there's no call for them. There's no point a particular zoo going out and breeding 50 alligators, because where do they go? All the zoos that want alligators have alligators.
Yeah.
And that's the same with just about every species at a zoo. So the species are managed. So not as much breeding gets to take place in zoos as you would like or hope. So a lot of the times, the guys just don't get that experience of, I can breed 50 species in a year at home.
Yeah.
Multiples of each of those species in a single season, where I wouldn't have, in my zoo years, I would have been lucky to have bred 20 species all up once.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And so that's part of the reason. You just don't get lots of experience breeding things in zoos. Everyone thinks you do, but that's not the case. That might be the case with certain endangered species where there is call for breeding them.
Yeah.
But when you think about zoo collections, the majority of the species they keep are just run-of-the-mill basic species.
And is that because of the red tape?
I think maybe public expectation too.
Yeah.
The public expects certain species to be at zoos.
And you want to keep species in a zoo that display well.
Yeah.
You want nice, impressive reptiles at a zoo. If you're going to have reptiles at a zoo, what do you think of? You think of things, Komodos. You think of your lace monitors. You think of your alligators, your crocodiles, your big tortoises. If we want to talk specifically Australian stuff, you think of things like your frill-necked lizards, your bearded dragons, silverback,
taipans, tiger snakes,
tiger snakes, Weimar pythons, black-headed pythons.
Death adders.
It's all your common run-of-the-mill stuff, and all the zoos have them.
Yeah.
They're easy to work with. They display well. There's no point in having an interesting animal. It's all it does is it spends all its time hidden away, and then people are basically looking at an exhibit and they don't get to see anything inside it, or they only see a bit of a coil or a bit of a tail or something like that. People get the shits over it.
When did you last see a knobtail gecko at a zoo? They're a beautiful, stunning little gecko. But when did you last see one at a zoo? You don't, because they spend most of their time in a burrow.
Yeah.
I don't think I ever have.
And unfortunately, a lot of reptiles are like that.
That's interesting, though. I would have thought a lot of invertebrates would have been like that as well, but I think I seem to remember you telling me that there was a whole heap of ways that the live exhibits part of Melbourne Museum found ways to display animals like that, like having cutaway burrows and all sorts of stuff to try and display.
Yep. And look, it would be great to see some of the zoos do that. There's nothing stopping some of these zoos trying some of those animals like that. I suppose with some of the things, the problem is it is a bit of a risk. Do you go to all that expense setting up that exhibit for it to fail?
Yeah.
So that's part of the problem.
Yeah, for sure.
You wrote 2 books ads. They were really well received. One was a guide to Australian pythons in captivity, and the other was a guide to Australian turtles in captivity. Can you still remember how it felt when the first one was released?
I can actually. That was always something that I'd always wanted to do, but honestly never expected to get the chance to.
Yeah.
And again, that comes down to wanting to share that information that's stuck up in our heads. There's no good stuck up in our heads where we can't do anything with it. So having that opportunity there to share that information was just amazing. As you guys are, I'm a keen photographer. To be able to share my artwork, as I call it, the photos, was amazing. Hopefully, we'll get the opportunity while I'm working on it now, just a little bit of a hint, a little secret that I may be working on a revised edition of that, the turtle book specifically. So
that will be very well received.
That'll be amazing, mate.
No promises on a time frame, but
figure how much has changed. You wrote that at the same time I did the snakes and the frog book. It came out in 2012. There's a lot's changed in the 14 years since. There's going to be a lot of rework to be done, I'd say, mate. It'll be well received, I'm sure.
Worth the wait. That's for sure.
Thankfully, it's not like some of the other species where there's 100 new described species. Still working with a similar number of species, thankfully.
You might have. I think you've lost a couple, actually.
Yeah, I suppose if you want to.
A couple of subspecies have gone down the gurgler now. So.
A couple of subspecies have gone, though. Yeah, you're probably right there, but I don't know. I think I'll still, probably just as John Can always will, I'll probably still consider most of those subspecies valid.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll cross that bridge in the book when I come to it.
What got you into photography, Ads?
To be honest, probably Scott.
Apologise to your bank account now, mate.
That was probably a bit of friendly rivalry. No, to be honest, look, I actually was taking photos probably before I knew Scott, but with an old film camera, much the same way Scott was. Scott had a much better camera than I did back then. And then all of a sudden, one day, digital cameras became a thing. And you would have heard this story from lots of different photographers. All of a sudden, taking photographs was easy. Well, easy compared to what it was. You didn't have to wait for film to be developed and hoping that you got one half decent shot.
Yeah.
You knew what your photos looked like straight away. Where prior to digital photography was hard.
Yeah.
It really was. Where now you look at, anybody can pick up a camera and take a good photo. You don't even need a camera. You can take a really good photo on your phone.
Yeah.
But part of that was I'd always herped, and just a lot of trips with you, Scott, and being able to share what I was seeing on those herp trips. I mean, we've seen things that probably even at 99% of herps in Australia are never going to see. We've got to record those moments.
100%, mate.
Even just some species that we've come across that you work so hard to find once in your life.
But there is another thing I think why you like photography so much, particularly is because of one of your other hobbies. And in some ways, I see photography a bit like hunting, but your trophy at the end of the day is a digital file as opposed to something else. And I wonder if that is something that you particularly enjoy as well.
Definitely, there is that element to it. And it's also, though, just great to be... You look back through your photos now, and I'll bring photos that I forgot that I even had, and then you get all those memories associated with that trip come flooding back.
Yeah.
100%. I love that when I look at your book or when I look at photos that we've taken when we've been on trips together. I'll look at a photo, and that photo that's sitting in a book or in a publication or whatever, it just brings that trip back.
That whole trip is just brought back to life.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%.
And that's one of the amazing things about photography in general, isn't it? And I think that's probably one of the main reasons that photography was originally invented. It's the same when you look at a photo of your grandparents or anything. It just brings back all those good memories.
I used to work at Rabbit Photo, so I see the other side of that too. One good photo out of 24 or 25 shit ones because there's a few extra on the film. And you think, I don't want to be the one that hands this over to the person because he's going to have to pay $10 to find out he got one photo.
Yep.
I know in the day I was shooting reptiles and stuff on film and slide, the amount of times that if you put the ISO in wrong when you loaded the film into the camera, and if you put it in at 400 ISO when you're actually using 100 ISO, everything would be dark and you'd end up just chucking away a roll of film. And then you'd have to try and scan it into a digital form, and getting a decent quality scan in was almost impossible as well. It was really, really difficult back then. And so you just end up getting rid of a roll of film or whatever. And every time you press the shutter, it used to cost you $1 sort of thing. I suppose in some ways, I think my digital photography for a long time suffered because of it, because you get into this habit where you take one or two photos because you don't want to take any more than that, because in your mindset, this is costing me time and money, when realistically you could always just take more photos. But yeah. What sort of camera gear are you using now?
So I'm using a Canon 5DSR, which is still one of your, I suppose, the EF lenses. All the new versions now are your RF mirrorless.
Yep.
Which I've played around a bit with those. To be honest, I don't know that there's much benefit at the moment changing. I have been up at sort of debating whether I upgrade to the RF. I call it an upgrade. It's not a huge amount of benefit to me at the moment. I mean, the 5DSR, it's still taking 51 megapixel images. They're as crisp as anything. I think for now I'll probably stick with that stuff until the camera breaks and I need to replace it.
The tough part is that all your lenses need to be replaced as well.
Actually, the lenses work really well. Apparently, the EF lenses work really well on the RF lens with the adapter.
So I might get a mirrorless before you do that.
It sounds that way. Because the Nikon adapter rings aren't as good to go across to the mirrorless setup in the Nikons.
You and I have always had friendly banter about, you say Nikon's better, I say Canon's better. To be honest, at the end of the day, they're both brilliant cameras. It's like that old Ford Holden argument.
Yeah.
One brings out some sort of technology, the next one does.
I think the thing that we both find frustrating, the amount of times that I've rung you for a bit of advice on how to use a Canon, because I'll know what settings I want to use, but trying to find it in the Canon menus is, because it's so foreign to the Nikon menus, is an absolute nightmare. So trying to use those menus does my head in. And I think half of it, that's the problem. But the image quality that you get out of either system is certainly comparable and just as good as each other.
Look, you talk about that, trying to work out where something is in the menu. I've upgraded cameras 3 times, and every time they seem to change where everything is, and I have to learn it all myself again anyway. So,
and we love you for it, Ads.
I'll say this, the Nikon don't seem to do that, mate. It all seems to stay in the same format. It makes it not
that would be nice. But I just want to quickly touch back on photos, just quickly, because there was just something that came into my head, and that was recently I've done it for a long time, but I've been sort of updating the catalogue, I suppose, of my photos. And I've got some photos in there that I've taken that were, honestly, they're just rubbish.
Yeah.
I would never publish them. And I was going through and I actually went to start to delete some of them. And then I actually stopped, and I've kept them all. And I've kept them all for that very reason that I was saying earlier, is that I've kept them photos for those memories that brings back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So even though they are rubbish photos and they'll never get published, they'll never be seen by anybody else but either me or my kids or my wife. It's just I've kept them photos for the memories that they bring back.
And that's irreplaceable.
Because that is irreplaceable.
Yeah.
Exactly. So sometimes you won't get that perfect photo. Probably maybe think about whether they still are worth keeping in a little folder somewhere.
Yeah, definitely. What was the first photo that you got published, Ads? Where did it get published also?
Oh, that would have been in one of the reptile magazines, probably the old Reptiles Australia.
Yeah, okay.
I would have said.
Yeah.
Can you remember what it was?
Oh, you're testing the old memory now.
That magazine has for about 10 years.
I can't recall what it is exactly, but I did write lots of articles for Reptiles Australia and probably a few for Scales and Tails as well.
Can you give the listeners one of your tips with regards to photography?
Don't listen to what everyone tells you, number one.
Yeah.
I mean, there are certain rules with exposure and f-stop and things that you sort of do need to follow a little bit, but sometimes you'll get a cracker shot just doing something completely unexpected.
Yep.
And all of a sudden you'll look down at your settings and you'll go, geez, I hadn't changed it from something else. You just go, oh, wow, that just came out amazing. And normally I wouldn't have done it that way.
Yeah.
So with digital cameras, that's the benefit, because you don't have to worry about it costing you $1 a shot. You can take 1 million shots. So don't be scared to just experiment with digital cameras.
Yeah.
There's no harm in it at all.
Doesn't cost you anything to take another photo, does it?
Cost you anything to take another photo. So try different techniques or different exposures and f-stops and things. Just try different things. Have fun with them.
Are you a night owl or an early bird? When are you most productive at?
So that depends on what I'm doing. So unfortunately, my job at the moment means that I have to get up at 5:30 in the morning. So I've been a bit of an early bird. But normally when I'm home, I'm definitely a night owl.
Yeah.
My wife, Liz, she'd be in bed at 8 o'clock if she could. She'd be in bed before the street lights are on. Whereas I'm more than happy to be up till 1 o'clock in the morning. And in fact, when I was writing the turtle books, that was sort of when I got my best work done, because I had young kids at that time.
Yeah.
Trying to get anything done before they were in bed was impossible. So I'd be up sometimes. You'd look up at the clock and, oh, geez, 3 o'clock in the morning all of a sudden.
Yeah.
But that also probably comes from those long nights of herping. I think most herpers are night owls. Those long nights driving the roads.
Except when things are first active in the morning and basking, and then you sleep in the middle of the day when it's too hot.
When it's too hot, exactly.
Unless you've been turtling and snorkeling for turtles during the day.
Even though I say my job because is forcing me to be a bit of an early bird at the moment, I'm actually going herping tonight.
Good work.
I'm going to go out and have a look for some grey snakes. Conveniently, I'm working in Western New South Wales at the moment, and we've got 37-degree day today. Well, it's actually 38, and a bit of a shower predicted later on. So I'm going to go and have a look for some grey snakes this evening.
Nice.
I'll probably have a bit of a late one tonight, I reckon.
Try and get some photos of that southern population. It'd be interesting to see some photos of those southern animals.
Look, I haven't seen one of the Queensland ones either, so I'd be happy to see any at this point. There's not too many things in this part of the world, Western New South Wales, that I haven't seen. But that is one of them.
They're pretty toxic little snakes too. They knock you around. All hemiascus. I've got a personal love of hemiascus in that regard, mate. You were there for that.
Most people have seen the photos of you.
Yeah, that's it.
Looking a bit special. I was going to use a different word there, but that's politically incorrect, so I'm not going to use that one.
Some would argue that I look that way normally, so
a bit more so. That was all.
What's an average week look like for you?
At the moment, I'm working as a fauna spotter catcher. For those people that don't know what that is, you're basically moving animals in the way of construction projects, gas pipelines, transmission lines, things like that. My day at the moment involves me getting up at 5:30 every morning, and at the moment I'm following a grader.
Lovely.
Nice.
Nice and dusty, that is.
Nice and dusty and hot.
Yeah.
But essentially getting paid to herp. So
it's not a bad job. Can you share with us a professional piece that you're proudest of?
Oh, one of the things that I was actually really proud of was being fortunate to breed both species of Australian crocodile down in miserable cold Ballarat in the same year.
Nice.
Very few facilities in the Southern Hemisphere have bred any crocodiles.
Outside of the tropics.
Outside of the tropics, yeah. So being able to do that in a completely artificial environment in Ballarat for both freshwater crocodiles and saltwater crocodiles in the same year, I was pretty happy with that.
I would be too. Can you share with us any unique or unconventional approaches you've taken in your work?
Unconventional approaches. I can't comment on specifics because nothing's really jumping out to my mind at the moment. But I'm going to share a benefit of working in private institutions. So apart from Melbourne Museum, the other zoos that I've worked at have been privately owned. And I've found that to be a huge benefit because a lot of the government institutions, for example, are heavily bound by regulations, which private zoos are not. So you get to be a lot freer and more hands-on working in private institutions than you do in the government hands-off institutions.
Yep.
If any of the listeners are looking at starting out in this line of work, volunteer is your best way to go. And my recommendation would be volunteer for any of the private facilities that you can.
Yeah.
And for any job too. Don't worry about if your aim is to work in reptiles, but there's a volley job that comes up for birds, get into it.
Yeah.
Do it straight
foot
away.
in
It
the
doesn't
door.
matter. Get that foot in the door.
Get your foot in the door. Yeah, exactly.
And do it like a paid job too. Take it. Imagine you are getting paid, because at the end of the day, if you're a volunteer that treats it like a real job, you're going to be much better respected. And then when the opportunity for a paid job might come up, you're going to be looked at much more seriously. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Definitely. Well, what a lot of people don't realise is that generally, I'm not going to say always, but generally the volunteer pool is where you first look at for any potential new employees.
Yeah.
You know, so as a volunteer, you work your hardest, bust your guts, and you'll have a real good shot of getting into the industry.
Sweet.
Who do you admire most in your professional circle? Who was your mentor?
There's actually a couple. Number one is probably one that's close to your heart also, would be Brian Barnett.
Yeah.
Now, Brian Barnett would be very familiar to anyone that's Victorian, obviously. Not necessarily so much to anyone in some of the other states, and definitely not the younger generation. You know, as I said earlier, he's one of those pioneers that made all the mistakes. Well, so we didn't have to make as many. We still made plenty, but he might have saved us making a few.
Yeah, but between him and his mate, the amount of stuff that those two guys in particular came across, I mean, it was pretty incredible. The amount of stuff that they picked up.
Yep, exactly. And then there was a few others. Then you've got your John Cairns and your Greg Parker from Ballarat Wildlife Park.
Yeah.
I remember the first thing I ever knew of Greg was actually just his photos on one of his posters that he's put out.
Yeah.
And seeing some of these animals, and you just go, oh, wow, I can't wait till I'm old enough to get my license and I can go looking for these things. And that's exactly what we did. As soon as we were old enough to drive, both of us, we were gone.
Funnily enough, I'm sitting in my office. I've got a couple of those posters literally on my wall, still to this day. What was it like going out with Peter?
So that was the other one. Peter was an amazing influence on my life. I never had a lot to do with Peter Krause until sort of quite late in my herp career. But Peter was just an amazing bloke. There wasn't much that he didn't know about reptiles.
Yep.
And a lot of people don't realise he was actually extremely knowledgeable about all sorts of animals. One of the things a lot of people wouldn't have realised is that back in the day, he was actually a museum collector. He was one of these guys back in the day that used to travel around the world collecting different animals for museums and zoos and places all over the world.
Yeah.
The amount of traveling he's done, the animals he's seen in the wild, the things, and it's that spending that time in the wild, which you and I have learned, that teaches you so much about keeping animals in captivity. Now, that's one of the downsides or the part that a lot of the new keepers these days are missing out on. Yeah, they know the technical stuff because you can read that on Google, but getting out and into the wild, you pick up a whole heap more. It's just another dimension to add to reptile keeping. So that's one thing I would encourage any of these new keepers to do. Yep, it's great keeping all these things and learning as much as you can on the internet, but get out there and see some of this stuff in the wild.
I think it also gives you a reset too and an appreciation.
Yep, of course. But yeah, you can't learn it on the internet.
Nothing quite like getting out and feeling 36 degrees at 97% humidity is, and you you get out and you can feel the moisture as you take a breath. Getting out there and appreciating that relentless sort of heat is something that's pretty incredible. And to then get out and see how things are in the environment and how animals are utilizing shade or moisture or even going and soaking or going into burrows and things like that as a way that they can get rid of that excessive heat and excessive cold. But on the other side of it too, that when you use the stuff in the wild, you've got to use it to your advantage. But just because in a location it might snow doesn't mean to say that you're going to put snow inside the reptile enclosure when you get back. It's about using that balancing act of learning what you can from the wild and adapting the appropriate parts into captivity as opposed to the whole of it into captivity.
Yeah. I just want to go back a step for a sec, if you don't mind, and just quickly, because we just started to touch on it and then we got sidetracked, and that's Peter Krause.
Yep.
A lot of guys, I'm assuming on your podcast, will be familiar with Peter. Mm-hmm. Actually, I've found out recently, it's amazing how many of the young guys have no idea who Peter is. For those who don't know Peter, he's responsible for things like Woma pythons in captivity in Australia. But he was just an amazing, helpful, nothing but helpful to me person. I was extremely sad when he passed, but I was fortunate to do probably his last major herp trip with him. And that was, we got to spend a couple of weeks in Kakadu looking for Owen Pallies. And I think that probably was his last herp trip. was spent with me, and that's me and actually an American friend, Ryan, and that was extremely special. Getting to spend that last time with him up there, especially looking for Owen Pallies. So, anyone who knows Peter Krause will know the story of the Owen Pallies, or probably should. Don't have time to go into it in this podcast.
Long story cut in half, he was the first person to breed Owen Pallies in captivity.
Yeah, exactly. So going to be able to spend his herp trip up in Kakadu looking for Owen Pallies with Peter, that was extremely special. Something I'll never forget. Unfortunately, we didn't find any, but that's not to say we found plenty of other amazing critters. Yeah, but Peter, I found him nothing but helpful. Any time that I've had a question for Peter, he would spend hours on the phone talking to me. Look, we'd bounce questions off each other. There was plenty of times when Peter rang me for advice, which I felt the first time he ever rang me for advice, to be honest, a bit taken back.
Same here. I was like, are you pranking me? Like, you're asking me?
Like any of us, or any of us that are good at what we do, he wasn't afraid to keep learning. He didn't think that he knew everything. Keep learning and taking in different ways of doing things. Even though he might have bred lace monitors 100 times, he would often bring me and call me about breeding lace monitors, because I'd bred lace monitors 100 times, but I was in cold Victoria. He was in hot Cairns, Tablelands. And the way I did it down in freezing cold Victoria was completely different to the way he would do it in Cairns.
Yeah.
Would learn different techniques by bouncing questions off each other and talking for hours on the phone about all sorts of stupid things.
I think that was one of the things about Krause that was so good, is that one of the reasons why a lot of us try and emulate some of the things that he does, in the sense that he was always willing to ask questions, didn't necessarily agree with the answers, didn't necessarily take everything on board carte blanche, but he took it under advisement and would assess everything that you'd tell him, and he'd go, oh, okay, well, this is a different way to do things or whatever. And he might make those little adjustments to see if things would improve.
What would be the top 3 reptile books you would recommend our listeners read?
So my top 3, Steve Wilson and Jerry Swan's The Complete Guide to Reptiles of Australia.
Yep.
Great field guide, best field guide out there. If you want to know what something is when you're out in the bush, take that with you.
7th edition is off to the printers, I believe. So it'll be out next year sometime.
Yeah, which I'm really looking forward to that one, because no doubt there's going to be a whole heap of new things in that. The second one would be coggers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All the coggers are amazing. For a long time, they were considered the Bible.
Yeah.
And even though we still have, these days, we have The Complete Guide by Steve Wilson and Jerry Swan. It's amazing how often I will pick up coggers. Especially when I'm at home. It is a big book, so it's not really a field guide type book, but when you're at home and you're doing work at the computer desk, I will grab coggers probably more than I grab Steve Wilson, Jerry Swan's book. The other one's John Cairns' turtle book.
Yeah. Yeah. The newer one that he did with Ross Sadler.
I like the new one. I actually preferred his original one. It's something about, I don't know what it is. I can't quite put my finger on that. I think when he did the original one, a lot of those turtles were all brand new and exciting, and no one knew about them. And it was all these photos in there of John diving in rivers, where the crocodile-infested rivers for pig-nosed turtles and things like that. So back then, that was amazing. Yeah, it's hard to pick. It is hard to pick through. The other books I use a lot, the Marion Anstis' book, Frogs and Tadpoles. There's so many out there these days, which is, as I said, the young guys these days don't know how easy they've got. I remember when I was first trying to find reptile books, and I'd go to the library, and I'd be lucky if they had 2 books on reptiles. And most of the time, one of them would be on American reptiles, and I might find something on Australian reptiles if I was lucky.
Might have a thorny devil in it, or a feral dragon, or a carpet python, or a green tree python.
Yeah, well, I remember one of the first ones, one that sticks in my mind at the library, the lizards of Australia.
And then as time went by, they realised how popular they were. They got them in. They get stolen the week they got them in, and they just refused to get them back in again.
Yeah, so one of the first ones I remember picking up at the library was the Lizards of Australia, Steve Swanson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Guys these days, they just don't know how easy they've got it. For me to get information back then, I would go from one library to the next library, to the next library, to the next library.
Yeah.
And you might get one book from one library on reptiles, or 2 if you were lucky. And then you could go to the next library and you'd get a book if you were lucky, or 2 books if you were lucky.
It's funny, all of those guys, like Steve and Jerry and Hal, they knew Steve Swanson, and they knew John Cairn, and they knew Graham Gow, and So all of those authors all knew each other and they all helped each other out with regards to those publications. All incredible books, but they all sort of helped each other as well.
And that's something that is dying a little bit in the hobby. When you and I sort of first started getting into herps, it was quite a close-knit, almost community. Everybody in the herp world knew everybody else.
Yeah.
Whereas now, half of the country would have no idea who I am these days, which has not necessarily a bad thing at times.
What's been your favourite herp trip to date?
Oh, the one I was mentioning with Peter Krause up in Kakadu and Ryan Young. Ryan Young is an amazing guy that I was lucky enough to meet from over in the States. He's
lovely.
He's lovely, but he's also an amazing python breeder.
I think he's got the record at the
I
moment.
believe he has the record for a number of species, python species in the world that he's bred.
Yeah.
What is he? Won a couple in front of the Barkers, I reckon.
Yeah, I think he's a couple in front of the Barkers, and him and Nick are pretty close to each other, I think, as well. But he's got Nick pipped at the moment.
But Ryan's amazing. Yeah, and Ryan came over and we did that trip through Kakadu with Krause, and that was something I'll never forget. And obviously with the passing of Krause not long after that, that'll hold a special place in my heart forever.
For sure.
Where would you like to go, but you haven't been?
You know, a lot of people are fascinated with travelling all over the world, and leaving Australia doesn't hold a great deal of interest to me. This country is so big, I could still spend the rest of my life travelling around this country and not see all the things that I want to see.
Yeah.
There's a few spots. I've gone pretty much around the place. I think the only strip that I haven't done, there's only a little bit. There's not much I haven't gone around. I've got to do between Broome and Kununurra. On the Cape, I haven't done Weipa, and that's about it. Pretty much I've been everywhere else. There's also little spots in between that I want to fill in. But yeah, doing Hill Plateau would be high on my list.
You and I have been talking about doing that trip for 20 years. We should probably go and do it.
Before we're too old and have to do it in a wheelchair.
What's your go-to herping gear or equipment you can't live without? What can you not go without on a trip? It's either going to be a head torch or a camera, I reckon, but which one?
Oh, I'd be both of them. Couldn't do without either of them these days.
No, I don't reckon you could.
That and iced coffee.
Ice break or Farmers Union?
Ice break.
Good work.
Ice break. Yeah, no, I do enjoy my iced coffees.
Well, this time of year, mate, you can get yourself an eggnog too, I suppose.
Oh, yeah, I haven't had one of them for a while. I'm actually enjoying a nice cold iced coffee as we speak.
Good work. Good work.
It's probably warming up because I haven't had much chance to drink it.
That's all right.
What's been the most memorable animal you've found?
Well, I actually said to you guys that I didn't find an Oampelli with Krause, and that's a little bit of a lie. We did get to see an Oampelli for a very brief second before it disappeared into a crack. And even though I've got no photographic evidence, you know what they say, pics or it didn't happen. Yeah. I know I saw one. Ryan, with Ryan. So I was still happy to see one, especially with the whole trip with Krause. That was pretty cool.
So I would have thought it might have been the Pinga Cola.
There's so many. Honestly, it's like asking you, Scott, what was your favourite? There's just so many of them. I remember the first time I saw a wild diamond python. That was amazing. Where we grew up, you know what it was like. Tiger snakes, copperheads, and blue tongues. Cunningham skinks. What else would you see? A white skink every now and then, and some garden skinks. So once we finally had that ability to actually get out and do some proper herping, it was all amazing. Right?
Yeah, you're pretty excited the first time you saw a Vic carpet.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
That first Vic carpet you saw, you were pretty excited about.
Yep. So there's just so many of them. And that's why I said earlier, encourage people, get out there and go and look at some of these things, or look at the things you're going to see, just going to blow your mind. The more time you spend out there in that bush, and as you said earlier, Kai, it's good for the soul.
Yeah.
That's my therapy.
What's your unicorn species?
I might be working harder out in that bush than I'll be working at work, climbing up escarpments and doing 15K walks up mountains. But that's the most relaxed I'll ever be.
Yeah.
Unicorn species.
Yeah.
Oh, I've got to get back out there and actually get a shot of an Oampelli. Nah, I've got to tick that one off. That would be my unicorn species, I would say, at the moment. Actually, an inland type, I've looked for them and struck out in both spots for them. I'd like to see one, even though I've kept them in captivity privately and professionally. The animals that you just want to see one in the wild. It would be nice to see one.
Yeah. Is there a destination that you've been to that you'd never go back to?
Probably not, to be honest. They all have their charm. I honestly can't really think of too many places that I've hated. Nothing springs to mind, a place that I've hated and said I'd never go back there. I love our country. There's so many different things to see. The beauty about Australia is you can get in your car, you don't like something, you drive 1 hour and it completely changes. And you've got a whole different array of species, different habitat, and you've only driven an hour.
Yeah, true.
You drive along the east coast if you want to go into the desert. It's not far inland.
That's it.
Our country is so huge, yet it's so different within an hour or two. It's amazing.
Yeah, and that's what I said. I'm quite happy to just spend the rest of my life visiting all those other little corners of this country. I've almost done the lap right around, but there's plenty of little spots in between where I haven't got to yet.
What was the silliest way you've accidentally injured yourself?
Oh, I did a beauty actually over in South Australia. So for quite a few years, I was working for Melbourne Uni doing field work, collecting tawny dragons for them. And tawny dragon went running up this rock face, and I quickly went chasing it up this rock face. And where I actually placed my foot on the bottom to sort of spring up to try to grab it, the whole rock gave way. I was about 2 meters up already by that point, up sort of a creek bank, and below me was just nothing but rock. And as the rock gave way, I just went, "Uh-oh, this is gonna hurt." And I remember, just as I fell, I remember all I thought was, just protect your face, protect your face. I remember consciously, you know what, hit the rocks though, don't you? Nothing but face.
As long as you kept your teeth.
I had a similar incident with a waterfall and a rotten log, and I fell 3 meters down a waterfall when a log gave way, and I landed in this huge pile of leaves. It was almost like it was in slow motion. I was like, I'm going to break my fucking leg here. And, you know, I'm 15K from the car. This is going to suck ass. I'm just going to be in a whole heap of pain. This is going to be shit. I just happened to be lucky, and it was just pick myself up, and then that was it. But after that, I must admit that I've now been, particularly if I'm herping by myself, I'm a lot more cautious about where I put my hands, where I put my feet, and not necessarily being as stupid as I used to be when I was younger.
No, and that happens to all of us. I think it just comes with age. When you're younger, you just feel like you're invincible. You get to a certain age, and all of a sudden you realise, shit, I can die doing this stuff.
I still, to this day, I thought you died at bloody Girraween one night when
the torch,
that fucking dolphin torch. We were up, and I remember I was on one rock face, you were on the other rock face, and there was like a valley in between. And I just saw this dolphin torch just going at a rate of knots down the hill, and Adam's not saying anything. I'm like, what's happened here? And I'm literally just watching this torch just go and go and go. I yell out to him, I go, "You right?" And he didn't say anything. And it was because of where I was standing, he couldn't really hear me. My voice wasn't traveling across. I could see the torch falling. He couldn't hear me. So I sort of started making my way over to where the torch was. And I yelled out, and then I could hear him yelling. I said, "You right?" Yeah, I'm okay. I just slipped with my torch. So then I had to carry this torch all the way back up to where he was. Funnily enough, that dolphin torch kept working. It did the job. Indestructible, those things.
That thing bounced off so many rocks, smashed its way down that hill about 100 meters or more, and still just kept working. Now, I've had a few close calls over the years, you know, and that'll happen doing this sort of stuff. There might have been a few bites here and there, which I'm not going to go into. And I remember falling off a waterfall at Croombit Tops with my camera.
Yeah, but you kept it out of the water.
For the most part. But for the most part, 4 days sitting on the dashboard of the car, it hadn't worked again. That's part of getting out there. You're going to have some slips and falls, and it's all part of the fun.
Definitely.
It's all fun until you break something.
As long as it's not the camera and it's a bone, it's a lot cheaper.
That's it.
Oh, I'd definitely rather break a bone than the camera. They heal.
What's the craziest thing you've done?
Craziest thing I've done? Look, there's been lots of crazy. One of the ones that I thought was probably a little bit stupid was getting bitten by a king brown up on Kakadu and basically riding it out. There was a bit of an oh fuck moment a couple of hours after that bite, when I was an hour into a 15K walk, only probably 45 minutes after that bite, where I went, oh fuck, might have made a mistake here. I was feeling pretty crook. But, so that was probably a bit of a crazy moment.
Outside of herps, what are your hobbies?
Mate, I got too many hobbies to list these days. Apart from herping, I generally do a little bit of fishing and a bit of hunting. I love my hunting.
Yeah.
Pretty much all of them I can combine in one trip, which is great.
Yeah.
I'll generally all of my holidays these days will be to destinations where I can do a bit of either hunting, fishing, herping, or all three.
I'm surprised Weeper hasn't been ticked off your list, mate. That's pretty good for all of those.
Yes, it's just the same old story from everyone. Once you have kids, it just gets a bit hard.
Yeah, it does.
But we've recently bought a caravan and with the aims of starting to do a little bit more travelling. So we'll see how that goes. Hopefully I can get there before I'm too old.
Do you have any regrets, Ads?
Oh, only agreeing to you to do these podcasts. That'd be my number one regret at the moment. And don't you go editing that out.
No, we'll leave that in there.
We'll leave that in there.
I don't really have any regrets. We've all done stupid things, but that's all part of growing up, isn't it? You're meant to do stupid things, right?
Yeah, the sum of your experiences, mate. We've all had things that haven't gone the way we wanted them to go, but you've learnt from those things, and because you've learnt from those things, you've changed the person who you are.
And there's a lot of those stupid things that we done when we were younger that makes us the people that we are now. But would I recommend doing them? No. But do I regret doing them? Definitely not.
What bit of advice would you give to a novice herper?
Learn as much as you can about the animals that you're keeping. Well, herping, I suppose a herper doesn't necessarily mean you're just a keeper. Herper, you can be a field herper. All right, if you're a keeper, learn as much as you can just from what you read in books. Get out there into the bush and try to observe. You will learn as much, not more, from watching these things out in the wild. Just get out of that computer chair and get out there. So not only is it great for keeping, for improving your keeping, it's just great for your mind.
I think too, the other thing is as well, when you get out into that environment, it even doesn't matter if you fail. Like if you go out there and you're looking for bearded dragons and the first time you go out there you don't see them, that doesn't matter. At least you're getting out into the environment where they live. You're starting to learn.
You'll see a whole heap of other different things too, probably.
Yep. You and I got it before we've actually found them. Multiple attempts, and
Mate,
don't give up. Every time you go back, you learn a little bit more.
Yeah, as most recently for me, Vestanistas, one of those things. I've been out there a few times having a crack at them and haven't got them yet, but that's okay. Each time you learn a little bit more when you're in the environment.
Yeah, a little bit closer every time.
So we've got a listener question from Riley Morris. What is the funniest thing you've seen occur at a zoo?
Look, trying to nail that down to one is difficult. There's just been so many, but one that comes to mind is a certain customer or group of customers that come in and asked us whether our 5 meter long saltwater crocodile was real. And once we said, yes, it's real, they just refused to believe us. Didn't matter how much we said. And so then they asked us, well, then can we go in and poke it with a stick to prove to them that
Wow.
that still wasn't enough to satisfy them.
Have you ever witnessed or experienced misogyny within your career? And what, in your opinion, could be done to try and stamp it out?
To be honest, I haven't seen a lot of it, which is probably a good thing.
Yeah.
We all hear stories of it, but personally, I have been fortunate enough that I have not come across it in the places that I've worked. Most of the places I've worked have been really good with equal opportunity work. Zoos these days, you almost have to be. It's all about public perception and image. If nothing else, even at some of the zoos I've worked, they've had higher number of women employees than males. I'm sure it does occur. Personally, I haven't witnessed it firsthand myself.
Yeah.
We do a little segment called 60 Seconds Under the Basking Spot. Are you ready, Ed? Swag it or stay in a hotel?
Swag.
Wine or beer?
Wine.
DIY or hire a tradie?
Do it yourself.
Android or Apple?
Apple.
Accomplice or ringleader?
Ringleader.
Ebook or old-fashioned book?
Old-fashioned book.
Order or spontaneity?
A bit of both, depending on the situation.
Savings or spendings?
Spendings.
Sweet or savory?
Sweet.
Introvert or extrovert?
Extrovert.
Macro lens or wide-angled lens?
Oh, again, both, depending on the situation.
Would you rather be able to fly or have a super strength?
Oh, that would depend on the super strength. I think flying is almost a super strength in itself.
Fuck, it'd make it easier cutting up some of those hills, being able to fly.
Yeah, it would. That's what I bet, yeah.
No drop torches.
No drop torches.
Tidy or messy?
Tidy.
Optimist or realist?
Realist.
And does pineapple go on a pizza?
Yes, it does.
What's the one takeaway that you'd like the audience to get from this episode?
The one takeaway from this episode is if you're going to have friends like Scott and Ty, expect to be dragged into shit like
Mwah.
Is there anything that we haven't covered that you want to say before we close out?
Look, you know what it's like with you guys. I think everyone by now knows that we've been friends for a long time, and the reality is you and I have regular phone calls every week, and we could probably just talk crap for hours. So,
Yeah.
Probably is do.
so this podcast, to be honest, hasn't been much different to one of our phone conversations. Probably minus swearing.
I was about to say, it's missing a lot of swearing.
On my behalf. There's been quite a lot of times where you probably heard me stumble a little bit, and that's because I'm trying to be really good.
That's okay. You'll swear.
I think I've done a pretty good job.
You have.
No, you've done a great job. Where can our listeners find you if they want to get in contact with you?
Shoot me a message on Facebook.
Thanks for listening to the Cold-Blooded Contributions podcast. The Cold-Blooded Contributions podcast is proudly sponsored by Midwest Tongs. For over 40 years, the Midwest Tongs team has provided the highest quality snake handling tools made in the USA. Made by professionals for professionals. Visit Midwest Tongs at www.tongs.com. A massive thank you to our guest, Adam Elliott. We really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to talk to us. Usually we'll be releasing our podcast monthly, so make sure you follow us so you don't miss out on an episode. Give the Cold-Blooded Contributions podcast a like on Facebook so you don't miss any updates, giveaways, or guest announcements. The links discussed in today's podcast will be in the show notes. And remember, always trust your creativity. It's intelligence having fun.